It's been such a wonderful time getting to know you through this experience. And it's only recently, after you've mounted this wonderful piece, that we are able to develop a conversation that's been really wonderful and illuminating and also empowering. Rough coat, generally in conventional terms in architecture, means that first layer, that is subsequently covered by a finished layer, not intended to be seen. I don't know if that conventional definition or term actually applies.
I thought about calling it brown coat, but rough seemed to be a little bit looser. And I think that sort of looseness in terms of associations and meaning was really important when we were working on not just how to make the piece and make all the decisions about the piece, but also how to name it. The practice of laying a plaster and like the render, actually, like rendering a surface has been something that I've been really interested in, this sort of coincidence of language between a sort of material and maybe even vernacular production of building and finishing. So it seemed natural that, in a way, to gravitate towards something that had to do with the sort of finish was precisely the sort of space that I wanted to work in, but also conceptually and ideologically a sort of open-endedness and a permissiveness, like an urgency to make something that didn't sort of completely explain itself.
That first coat seems to be about laying foundation or laying the opportunity for other things to grow out of it.
It's like a tactic. Mm-hmm. It's like a how we can work on architectural problems that are not as much about what we're making, but how we make them.
One of the things that I have been struggling with is how to articulate your work relative to the discipline. Your work seems to really speak to a different ilk, a different agenda. And I keep thinking of a word, maybe the words that best describe that new movement or that thrust towards something else is a kind of exalted formalism. You are now taking on and holding the idea that we can pursue ideas and formal ideas and also marry them with an autobiographical or personal agenda.
I think this idea of objective distance and a sort of pure formalism is a super myth. I think that ideas of subjectivity have always been at stake in the work that kind of have happened discursively and throughout time. I think it's for everybody to work on. Mm-hmm. I don't think that it's being a woman, being brown, being that's therefore a sort of question of okay, now you can take up this kind of question of identity and address that within a formalist tradition. I think it's everybody needs to become self-conscious of how they live and how their perspectives will kind of can put in a positive way, can help introduce new vocabularies into the stream of our conversation. To return to a sort of kind of canon has always, for me, has felt difficult, has always felt complex. And I felt that was powerful, to be self-conscious of that. It is about the stuff, and it is about how to work on things that are maybe mixed in their sensibility and can sort of operate on many levels. I think a lot about the landscape of our city and the people I interact with, and think about how that could influence the way in which I work on things that are very kind of insider, strictly tectonics, questions of color. Try to take advantage of these sort of sometimes funny, sometimes uncomfortable coincidences of meaning that just come out of being kind of aware.
We're sitting on this incredible piece which at sometimes looks soft and supple, and then sometimes has, the kind of roughness of a kind of low-grade sandpaper. Do you see these material explorations, these investigations with color? I see magenta here, I see brown on the other side of the room, and so I'm wondering if all of those things are seen as attempts to expand the discipline. There are materials and media that have been traditionally overlooked. Do you think that that's an accurate way to start to read this project?
When we are working with dark, colors, our tools have to function differently. We're really lit right now, right? We could also like take the lights way down, and how do we understand like the tonality and the kind of three-dimensionality of form? How do we see texture differently? Like the way in which we have to sort of adjust to be able to see things like differently because of their saturation or something.
The word monumental and the interaction with the city, which talks about life beyond this gallery space. The word monument to me offers a great deal of potency, but it seems a bit strange when we're looking at this piece because of its materiality, because of its looseness, let's say. Things are kind of laissez-faire to an extent.
We've talked about that, about this word, and I'm going to swerve a little bit because I think the thing for me was, how do we put together, I wrote down a sort of monumental blanket, or like, to me, like a blanket that is at a sort of attempting a sort of scale and stature that is completely opposite to kind of its own tendencies. It was like, how do you like throw certain things like really in through one another?
Yes. This thing itself we're sitting on is infused with, past memories that go beyond you or me. It talks about issues of race. It talks about issues of gender. To be trepidatious about that word seems to be almost a lost opportunity in my mind, because I think that there are obvious associations that one can begin to draw within the discipline.
This project is really precisely the undoing of that, or disinterested in a sort of power in the traditional sense.
And there seems to be very much a deliberate attitude towards, I need space and I want space, and no one's going to give me this space, so I must claim it and take it.
Yeah.
What is your arsenal? Is it to systematically reject? If they want it hard, I go soft.
I've been looking at things that are outside of a sort of abstract formalism. So I'd been doing this kind of survey of houses in Los Angeles and South Los Angeles, and looking at these kind of facades and front yards. I was trying to figure out a way to how to bring that work, which is kind of related to things, let's say, out in the world, into the gallery space as well. So those were the things that were really kind of important to me. Yeah, these houses are really beautiful. It's like not like about house type, right? But it is about like all of the stuff that we put on top of our houses, all the shrubs and all the awnings and all the window treatments, like interior and exterior. It's like trying to expand the subject of enclosure. It's much more cultural. It's much like more personal. It's much thicker, and also more temporal. I think that this project tries to take a position. Right, and so maybe like it tries to set up a sort of value system that allows for indeterminacy, that requires a certain amount of collaboration, that is playful, like pull you in but also make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Those things were all kind of critical for me, as well as like a kind of an old school tectonic question of how do you bring things together, and then what is, let's say, the relationship in terms of structure between one part and another part. We can start to describe new behaviors of things.
But the work could possibly be touched, and it's the tactile relationship to architecture. It's not just visual or spatial, but that there is a tactile dimension to the architectural experience. Would you consider yourself a radical, or?
I mean, I don't know.